Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to the Evil Dungeon Master Universe podcast. I am your host, the Evil Dungeon Master Vince. And I want to say thank you to everyone that's been giving me some good feedback. Lots of downloads lately. The podcast is doing very, very well. Mostly on Spotify and let's see, YouTube is doing very well as well. I'm glad I actually ported it over for everybody to hear. Head over to theevildm.com for all your needs and contact, whatever. Just a heads up for those that listen to podcasts like Roll for Initiative, Classic Phase Rip, and Save or Die. All those things the websites are probably going to be going away eventually due to maintaining them is no point. All the podcasts will still be available as we ported them over to Spotify, so you can still get them and download them. And if you're subscribe to them, there should be no break whatsoever in any of your subscriptions. So you can always just still find it. It's just a matter of I had to port it to a different host. That's all. With that said, today's topic: should players plan during combat? Or should a GM allow players to plan during combat? Now, I'm sure you've all have been part of a game where the combat is going on for a little bit and players start talking about how they're going to do this or that. Maybe one player says to the wizard, "Hey, get that fireball spell ready, John," or "Hey, Tim, can you heal me? I'm down on hit points soon." Or, "Hey, I'm gonna go around the side of the guy and see if I can get a cheap shot in. John, distract him with your fighter." I see strategy gaming all the time when I'm playing, and I equate it to the characters talking in game in combat to one another. Now we've probably all seen you've probably seen screens of it, or maybe a quick minute or so of the movie Gamers Darkness Rising. It really has some great examples of players at the table while in the middle of battle scenes and how they communicate in and out of character, jumping back and forth from the table to the actual in-world game when they're fighting and doing things. I'm perfectly fine with characters talking to a certain point to one another in combat. A sentence here or there, a strategy plan here or there, but not full-on conversations. I mean, it's hard to have a full-on conversation while you're fighting with swords or in the middle of trying to maintain your defense from being attacked. Sure, you can, glance over and say, "Oh, help me with this or that." 6 or 7 seconds worth of talking. But if they're going to just take the combat and boil it down to a complete stop so they can have a conversation about what they want to do, no. Now, talking before combat is a different story. They can do as much strategizing as they want before the actual game itself. Now, during the combat is a different story. But also, on the other hand, players talking during combat also means they're talking in character. Now, it may not be the exact sentences that they're saying. Like, use that +2 ability you have or something like that. I would equate that to something in chat. Use that special ability you have with the sword now. Again, in character, if you're saying these things out loud, that means the foe is also going to hear these things as well. Now, if they're a non-intelligent beast or something dumb, maybe something like an animal that has low intelligence or something, or maybe an orc or a kobold or something like that doesn't really have high intelligence, it probably doesn't speak common. Yeah, they're probably not going to understand. But if you're fighting a big bad with his minions and you're screaming out different various things what you want to do in combat, he's going to know. To a certain point, I don't want to say you're going to metagame as a DM or a GM, because you can't. You have to kind of play it neutral there. But if someone's going to be screaming out, "All right, I'm going to go head over to the left and sneak around and try to, John, you distract him," the guy's going to hear that. Unless the characters are something like, well, where as soon as we have a chance, we get back to back and move close to one another to have a conversation about what we want to do, then the bad wouldn't know anything about that. So you have to really be careful what you do say and don't say, especially if there's a somewhat intelligent foe that you're facing. Now, don't forget, as the DM, you have your big bad and you have his minions, and he will be barking out orders as well. So you have to remember that when you're controlling them, that they would do the same thing as well. So the big bad would be like, minions, go after the wizard. He is throwing spells at us, or something wacky like that, depending on what your big bad is like. So the players know that too. They hear that in character and they hear that out of character, so they can equate there and change their plans. Or you could say, the big bad decides, hold them off while I run and grab the necklace off the pedestal. Things like that. You have to remember to do that because you're adding flavor into the game. It's all part of the cinematic thing. You want to make it like it's kind of a movie you're watching, and not just a boring old combat that you're just sitting there going, I strike, I dodge, I parry, stuff like that. You want to have some cinematic fun with it. And that's the best way I could think that you would do it as far as combat wise. And letting players chat, I really have no issue with it. And I know a lot of people that do have issues. I've played in games where the DM would be like, you can't do that. I'm like, why? He goes, well, you can't talk during the combat or strategize during combat. There's not enough time. Or they'll say, fine, but that's your turn. No, I don't like that. That's wrong. Don't make players take their turn to talk. If it's like, especially if it's a small thing like just doing, grab the sword, this or that. If it's a full-on conversation, I want to stop and have a talk with the villain, then yeah, okay, that's your turn. Like when it was when I was playing this weekend, we were playing a Palladium Fantasy game, and they were facing they got into one of these rooms, and there was a golem in there, and the golem was starting to attack, but they figured out that he was somewhat intelligent because he was talking. So it's like, oh, so he's intelligent. So the summoner of the group said, well, I try to talk to him. I'm like, okay, well, what do you say? And he starts having a full on, well, I don't want. I'm like, okay, you say that, and that's your turn, because it was more than just a couple words. It was an actual full on, I want to have a conversation, put my hands up, let's talk. So that I understand can be considered your turn because you took up a lot of time during combat. Now, if it was just we don't want to fight, no, that's not that would just be a normal conversation. Then I would roll to see, how we reacted. But I did. He had a full on conversation with the golem. I rolled to see how the golem would react, and since he was intelligent and he was only there to provide just a riddle for them at the beginning, he stopped attacking. But the only reason he attacked in the first place is because the wizard, not wizard, excuse me, the knight, I don't know why I say wizard, the knight took 2 shots at him with a crossbow when he saw the glowing eyes in the room, and he rolled really high and hit the golem in the eye. So the golem was pissed, and he wasn't really in the mood to chat at first. He just came straight at the person. But I tried to give them a little bit of a hint that he was an intelligent creature, because he went, ow, why did you attack me? Like that. And he still kept aiming at the eyes, so an attack happened. And that's when they started to talk, and then I rolled to see if the golem would have some sense of, okay, well, maybe they're not really that bad of people. All right, that's how they got out of the situation. They wound up talking. The summoner used his attack to actually have a full-on conversation. And that's the only time I would actually take a movement away. But I hated that when I played in games with people and they'll say, well, if you want to talk, that's your move. No, I'm only going to say a sentence. No. And then sometimes the DM would get annoyed at people. I still remember this guy too. He would get annoyed, and if you ask too many questions, he'd be like, that's your turn. Yeah, I know. Don't play in the group. I didn't. I kind of dipped out of that group within probably another couple game sessions, and a couple other people left as well. Because it's not really that fun when you're there to have fun. And we're all there to play this game, and it's a tactical game sometimes, and it's a role-playing game other times, it's storytelling other times, it's exploring a character story arc, things like that. It's not the whole you show up and you get a lecture from the DM because you misused the spell and the DM couldn't figure out what the spell was at the time, so he took your word for it. Which is another story for another time. Is when I was in a group, the players, just I'm not even going to bother with the story because it was so dumb. But sometimes DMs take it too far, and you know how it ends. Well, that's going to end today's podcast. Tell me what you think. Should players be allowed to be talk during combat, or you make them use their turn? How strict are you when you run your games, and how strict is your game master when you try to play the game and do these things? Tell me in the comments. Don't forget to rate the podcast on Spotify. Thank you for those that have done it. Rate me on Apple Podcasts as well. Thank you for those that have done that as well. Head over there and you can just give star reviews. I'm going to head out. Keep it original. Keep it old school. Good night, and God bless everybody.